What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors faces off against a talk show host who refuses to show basic respect? In just 28 seconds, a single dismissive comment would turn a routine interview into one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. The morning started like any other on the set of Lorraine Kelly's talk show. The studio lights gleamed overhead, the audience settled into their seats, and the familiar theme music faded as Lorraine Kelly took her position behind the curved desk. Beside her sat her regular panelists, entertainment correspondent Sarah Mitchell, known for her sharp tongue and quick wit, and lifestyle expert David Roberts, who typically played peacemaker during tense moments. Colin Firth walked onto the set to warm applause, his presence commanding, yet humble. He wore a simple navy suit, his demeanor calm and professional as he took his seat across from Lorraine and her team. The interview was supposed to promote his latest film, a thoughtful drama about family and redemption. Instead, it would become something entirely different. Lorraine started with what seemed like standard questions. So Colin, tell us about this new project of yours. Another serious role, I see. Don't you ever fancy doing something a bit more fun? Colin smiled politely. Well, I think there's great value in stories that explore deeper human experiences. This film means a lot to me personally. Sarah Mitchell leaned forward, her expression skeptical. But don't you think audiences are tired of all this heavy drama? People want to be entertained, not depressed. I respectfully disagree, Colin replied, his voice steady. I think audiences are far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. They can handle complex emotions and challenging narratives. Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. Yes, but let's be honest. Your last few films haven't exactly been box office gold, have they? Maybe it's time to reconsider your choices. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Colin's expression remained composed, though a flicker of something passed behind his eyes. I've been fortunate to work on projects I believe in. Commercial success isn't the only measure of worth. Oh, spoken like someone who can afford to be selective, Lorraine said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. But some of us live in the real world, where results actually matter, David Roberts interjected, perhaps sensing the growing tension. I think what Lorraine means is... I know what I mean, David, Lorraine cut him off sharply. I'm simply pointing out that perhaps Colin here is a bit out of touch with what real people want to see. Colin sat forward slightly. I spend a great deal of time talking to people about film, about storytelling. I don't think I'm out of touch at all. Sarah Mitchell jumped in again. But you do live in a bubble, don't you? Big houses, fancy parties, Hollywood friends. When was the last time you actually connected with ordinary people? I connect with people through my work, Colin said, his patience clearly being tested. That's what acting is about. Finding universal truths in specific stories. Lorraine laughed again, that same sharp, dismissive sound. Universal truths. How very grand. Tell me, do these universal truths pay the bills? Because I'm looking at the numbers here, and they're not exactly impressive. I didn't come here to discuss my financial situation, Colin said quietly. No, you came here to promote a film nobody's going to see, Lorraine shot back. Let's call it what it is. The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. David Roberts looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Sarah Mitchell, however, seemed energized by the conflict. I think that's incredibly disrespectful, Colin said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an edge now. Not just to me, but to everyone who worked on this film. Hundreds of people poured their hearts into this project. Disrespectful? Lorraine's eyebrows shot up. I'm being honest. Something you celebrities aren't used to hearing, I suppose. You're all so surrounded by yes men and people telling you how wonderful you are. That's quite an assumption, Colin replied, and entirely inaccurate. Sarah Mitchell leaned back with a smirk. Oh, come on. You have to admit there's some truth to it. You actors live in this fantasy world where everything is about art and meaning, while the rest of us are just trying to get through the day. I never suggested otherwise, Colin said. In fact, that's precisely why I choose projects that speak to real struggles, real emotions. Lorraine shook her head. But you don't understand real struggles, do you? You can play them on screen, sure. But actually living them? That's different. You don't know anything about my life, Colin said, his voice hardening. I know enough, Lorraine countered. I know you went to fancy schools, had every advantage, and now you sit there lecturing the rest of us about meaningful art. David Roberts tried again. Perhaps we should move on to discussing the actual film. Why? Lorraine interrupted. So Colin can give us some rehearsed speech about his process. I think our viewers deserve a real conversation. A real conversation requires mutual respect, Colin said firmly. Something that seems to be lacking here. Oh, don't be so sensitive, Sarah Mitchell chimed in. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you're in the wrong business. Tough questions are fine, Colin replied. Personal attacks are something else entirely. Lorraine leaned forward, her expression hardening. Personal attacks? I'm simply pointing out facts. Your recent films have underperformed. You do live a privileged life. These aren't attacks. They're observations. Observations delivered with clear contempt, Colin noted. Maybe that's because some of us are tired of celebrities complaining about how hard their lives are, Lorraine said, her voice rising. You get paid millions to pretend to be other people. The rest of us actually work for a living. The audience gasped. Colin sat very still, his jaw tight. Acting is work, he said quietly, and I've never complained about my life. But I also won't sit here and be insulted. Insulted? Lorraine laughed. This is nothing. You should try working a real job for a day. See how you cope then. Sarah Mitchell nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Try working in retail during Christmas, or in a hospital on a night shift. Then talk to us about hard work. I have enormous respect for people in those professions, Colin said. I've never suggested otherwise. But you think what you do is just as important, don't you? Lorraine pressed. Making your little films about feelings. I think art has value, Colin said, his voice tight. I think stories matter. They help us understand ourselves and each other. How convenient that this philosophy also happens to make you very wealthy, Lorraine replied. Colin stood up suddenly. The movement was so unexpected that everyone froze. That's enough, he said quietly. Lorraine looked up at him, with surprise flickering across her face before being replaced by defiance. Excuse me? I said that's enough, Colin repeated. I came here in good faith to discuss a project I care about. Instead, I've been subjected to a series of personal attacks and baseless assumptions about my character and my life. Oh, please, Lorraine said, rolling her eyes. Don't be so dramatic. I'm not being dramatic, Colin said, his voice calm but firm. I'm being clear. And this interview is over. Sarah Mitchell laughed nervously. You can't just walk out. Watch me, Colin replied. David Roberts finally found his voice. Colin, perhaps if we just take a moment. No, Colin said, looking directly at Lorraine. I don't need a moment. What I need is to be treated with basic human decency. And since that seems impossible here, I'm leaving. Lorraine stood up as well, her face flushing red. You can't just walk off my show. Do you know how unprofessional that is? Unprofessional? Colin's voice carried a hint of incredulity. You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to humiliate me on live television, and you're lecturing me about professionalism? I was asking legitimate questions, Lorraine insisted. No, Colin said firmly. You were attacking me. There's a difference. A good interviewer knows how to ask challenging questions without resorting to personal insults. I never insulted you, Lorraine protested. You dismissed my work, questioned my integrity, and made sweeping generalizations about my life, Colin counted off. If those aren't insults, I don't know what is. Sarah Mitchell stood as well. You're being far too sensitive about this. Colin turned to her. And you've been egging this on from the start. Congratulations on contributing to such a hostile environment. The audience was completely silent now, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Lorraine stepped around her desk. If you walk out now, you'll never be invited back. Colin actually smiled at that, though there was no warmth in it. I promise you, that's not the threat you think it is. You're making a huge mistake, Lorraine said, her voice hard. The only mistake I made was agreeing to come here in the first place, Colin replied. I should have known better. Known better? Lorraine's voice rose. What's that supposed to mean? It means your reputation precedes you, Colin said evenly. I've heard stories about how you treat guests, but I thought perhaps they were exaggerated. Clearly, they weren't. David Roberts looked mortified. Colin, I'm sure we can work this out. There's nothing to work out, Colin said, already reaching for his microphone pack. I'm simply choosing not to subject myself to further abuse. Abuse? Lorraine practically shouted. This is a talk show. We have conversations. Sometimes they're challenging. Challenging is fine, Colin said, removing his microphone and setting it on the chair. This wasn't challenging. This was cruel. Sarah Mitchell scoffed. Oh, come on. You're really going to play the victim here? I'm not playing anything, Colin said, his composure never wavering. I'm stating facts. And the fact is, this has been one of the most unpleasant professional experiences of my career. Lorraine's face was now bright red. You're being ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Perhaps, Colin said. Or perhaps I'm simply refusing to be treated poorly. You can decide which one makes more sense. You'll regret this, Lorraine said. Walking out like this, making a scene. The only thing I regret, Colin said, is not leaving sooner. The audience began to murmur, a low buzz of shocked conversation. Some people were pulling out their phones. The camera operators didn't seem to know where to point their equipment. You can't just leave, Lorraine repeated, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. I can, and I am, Colin said simply. David Roberts made one last attempt. Colin, please. Let's all just calm down and... I am calm, Colin interrupted gently. I'm perfectly calm. I'm also perfectly clear about what needs to happen next. And what needs to happen is that I need to leave. Sarah Mitchell crossed her arms. This is going to make you look terrible, you know? I'll take my chances, Colin said. I'd rather look terrible for standing up for myself than look good for accepting mistreatment. Lorraine seemed to be struggling for words, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Finally she managed, Fine. Go. We don't need you anyway. Clearly, Colin said, though I wonder if your producers will agree. He turned toward the exit, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Behind him, Lorraine called out, This isn't over! Colin paused, looking back over his shoulder. Yes, it is. The finality in his voice seemed to land like a physical blow. Lorraine took a step back, her expression cycling through anger, an embarrassment, and something that might have been fear. You'll never work with this network again, she threatened. Colin's expression didn't change. I'll survive. Sarah Mitchell tried one more time. You're being completely unreasonable. No, Colin said quietly. I'm being reasonable for the first time since I sat down. I should have left the moment this turned hostile. It wasn't hostile, Lorraine protested weakly. Then we have very different definitions of that word, Colin replied. David Roberts had gone pale, clearly understanding that this moment would have consequences far beyond the studio. Colin, please, if you could just... No, Colin said, his voice gentle but immovable. I'm sorry, David. I know you tried to moderate this, and I appreciate that. But I can't stay here. The stage manager appeared, looking panicked, whispering urgently into a headset. Security personnel shifted uncertainly near the exits, unsure whether they should intervene. Lorraine seemed to realize she was losing control of the situation entirely. "You're making this much bigger than it needs to be." "I'm not making this anything," Colin said. "I'm responding to how I've been treated. The size of this moment is entirely down to your behavior, not mine." "My behavior?" Lorraine's voice cracked. "I was doing my job." "If your job requires belittling your guests, perhaps you should reconsider your career choices," Colin said. The audience gasped again. Sarah Mitchell's mouth fell open. David Roberts put his head in his hands. "How dare you?" Lorraine whispered. "How dare I what?" Colin asked. "Stand up for myself? Expect basic courtesy? Refuse to be your verbal punching bag?" "I never," Lorraine started, then stopped. "You did," Colin said simply. "You absolutely did. And now you're upset because there are consequences." "There will be consequences for you too," Lorraine warned. "I'm sure there will be," Colin agreed. "But I can live with them. Can you?" The question hung in the air. Lorraine opened her mouth, but no words came out. Colin gave a small nod, almost to himself. "I thought not." He walked toward the exit, his stride confident, despite the chaos erupting around him. The audience was buzzing now, some people standing, others leaning forward in their seats. Camera operators scrambled to capture every moment. "Colin!" Lorraine called out desperately. "Colin, wait!" But he didn't wait. He didn't even slow down. He reached the exit, pushed through the door, and disappeared from view. The studio fell into stunned silence. Lorraine stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and anger. Sarah Mitchell looked between her and the exit, clearly unsure what to do. David Roberts stared at the desk, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Finally, Lorraine turned to the cameras. "Well," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "That was unexpected." The audience didn't respond. The silence was deafening. Sarah Mitchell attempted to salvage something. "Shall we move on to our next segment?" But the damage was done. The energy in the studio had completely shifted. What had started as a routine morning talk show had transformed into something else entirely. A moment that would be replayed and discussed for years to come. Lorraine sat back down, her movements stiff. "Yes, let's continue." But her voice lacked conviction. David Roberts still wouldn't look up. The cameras captured every uncomfortable second. In the wings, producers were frantically making calls, already trying to manage the fallout. But there was no managing this. Colin Firth had drawn a line, had refused to cross it, and had walked away with his dignity intact. Back in the studio, Lorraine tried to regain her composure, tried to reassert control. But everyone watching knew the truth. She had pushed too hard, gone too far, and lost spectacularly. The show continued, but it was hollow. Every segment felt forced, every laugh strained. The ghost of Colin's exit haunted every remaining minute. Sarah Mitchell attempted jokes that fell flat. David Roberts barely spoke. Lorraine powered through, but her usual confidence had evaporated. The audience, and once engaged and entertained, now seemed uncomfortable, watching out of obligation rather than interest. Some people were clearly still processing what they'd witnessed. Others were already on their phones, undoubtedly sharing what had happened. When the show finally ended, Lorraine's smile for the cameras was brittle. The moment the director called cut, she stood abruptly and walked off set without a word to anyone. Sarah Mitchell and David Roberts exchanged glances, but said nothing. And what was there to say? They had all witnessed the same thing. They had all been part of it. In the dressing rooms, Colin Firth calmly collected his belongings. His publicist rushed in, already fielding calls, but Colin was serene. He had done what needed to be done. He had stood his ground. The building was buzzing with activity, people rushing between rooms, conversations happening in hushed, urgent tones. But Colin moved through it all with quiet purpose, unbothered by the storm he'd created. He had come to discuss meaningful work, to share something he believed in. Instead, he'd been forced to defend his basic worth as a human being. And when that became untenable, he'd made the only choice that made sense. He'd left. It was that simple, that profound, that necessary. And as he walked out of the building into the bright morning light, he knew he'd made the right decision. Dignity, he understood, was not something to be bargained with. It was something to be protected, defended, insisted upon, even if it meant walking away. Especially if it meant walking away.